My name is Isis Howard. I'll be presenting on behalf of the Xerces Society along with my colleague Sarah Cuadra-Vargas. And then we'll have a guest speaker, Melissa Burns, joining us at the end. She's from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All right, next slide. Just a quick webinar reminders before we dive in. This webinar will be recorded and the recording will be available on westernmonarchcount.org in approximately 1 week. We'll also send an email out via our newsletters for the Western Monarch Count. There are closed captionings. At the bottom of your screen, you can see this little box shape with CC standing for closed captioning. You can go ahead and click that on if you would benefit from those resources. And then if you have questions during the webinar or afterwards, you can communicate those through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. There will be time for question and answer at the end live, but some of us may hop in that Q&A box and answer them immediately too, depending on the content. All right, we can go forward again. So we're here today to discuss the findings from this year's Western Monarch Count. The Western Monarch Count is an annual Xerces Society initiative that tracks overwintering Western monarchs and their habitat. It started in 1997 and has run for 29 years through the present. It was co-founded by Mia Monroe, who's also one of our regional coordinators, but still co-coordinates the entire count with us at the Xerces Society. So shout out to Mia. Thank you so much for your long-term efforts to help monarchs. Next slide. And what we're doing in the Western Monarch Count is we're tallying the overwintering migratory monarchs in the Western US. So a lot of times people know that monarchs migrate long distances, but they think that all the monarchs go down to Mexico to overwinter. And we actually have an awesome phenomenon that happens along our west coast. And some of these monarchs west of the Rocky Mountains end up overwintering at hundreds of sites along our California coastline. And there's a couple inland sites in California and Arizona as well, where prior research has shown overwintering butterflies. So in the Western Monarch Count Initiative, we are tallying up all the overwintering butterflies in the West. And then the World Wildlife Fund of Mexico will release their estimates of overwintering Eastern monarchs down in Mexico a little bit later on. Usually we hear from them around, March or so. So keep an eye out for that, but know that for the context of this webinar, the numbers we'll be referring to are focused on that Western migratory population. Next slide. Oh, and there's the circle around the area. So this project is community powered. We rely on support from many, many groups and individuals, including the hundreds of volunteers who participate in the count to visit all these hundreds of sites we know about, the regional coordinators who are our local leaders who coordinate the volunteers in their area. We also have support and funding from local, state, and federal partners, our Xerces Society funders, and of course, our Xerces members. So thanks to everyone who contributes to making this initiative possible. Next slide. The way we get the numbers is we send people out to the known overwintering sites because monarchs tend to return to the same sites year after year. We have folks go out, they bring binoculars, their data sheets, or a smartphone or, tablet to collect data. And they literally search the trees at these special groves, hunting for monarch butterflies. We don't engage in any hands-on counting. Instead, we stand back, use our binoculars, and count from a distance. This is a picture from one of our volunteers and regional coordinators, Diana Magor, and it shows how she actually took a photo of this one, and then she went in and put a dot on every single butterfly she saw in that cluster, and then created a tally for that cluster. And what volunteers like her will do is go out, do this in the field, make an informed estimate, and then they will tally that up on their sheet of paper. This is a big cluster of butterflies from a couple years ago. We didn't see too many of this size clusters this year, um, but this is just an example of how folks do it. So our volunteers do go through virtual and field training. They learn all of our monitoring protocols, which helps standardize the data sets that we now present to you so that the numbers can be compared across years, through time, and across regions geographically. And all the data goes through a data vetting process by the Xerces Society, and then we publish the final vetted standardized tally to you all. Next slide. So the graph from this year shows that this season's numbers did not spike up as we may have been wishing for, like the 2020 to 2021 bounce. Instead, the numbers remained fairly steady. And so it's kind of hard to tell on this graph because the numbers are so low compared to historic numbers. And basically, what you're seeing here is like two bar charts overlaid with each other. So we've got the Western Monarch Count from 1997 to present, which are those like green bars. Those are the monarch totals. So you can see in 1997, we had over 1 million monarchs estimated along the coast. Now, what you can also see in this little inserted chart, you can see this dark blue line going up and down. So this is our volunteer effort over the years. So it's bounced a little bit too, just like the monarch counts, but what you can see generally is an upward trend. So even though we're getting more monitoring coverage, we're seeing less butterflies. And what we added in this year was a little extra context. So you can see on this left-hand side of this figure, you see these gray bars, and these represent the population viability analysis conducted by some of our research partners. And it aims to estimate how many monarchs were present before the Western Monarch Count began in 1997. So at that bottom axis, you can see 1980s, 1990s. And what we know from historical records is that there were likely low millions back in the 1980s. And so since then, monarchs have declined in the West by more than 95%. Next slide. So the tallies for this year, whoop, whoop. Sarah, you can click one more time. So today we're going to be really focusing on these mid-season tallies. This is what we formerly called the Thanksgiving count. But the mid-season tally typically represents the peak numbers of the overwintering season. This survey ran from November 15th through December 7th. And the total was 12,260 monarch butterflies. So a bit up from last year's total of a little over 9,000 butterflies, but still relatively similar and hunkering down in those low numbers compared to historic accounts. Folks searched 249 overwintering sites, so a really good portion of our overwintering sites were monitored for this. And what compared to all the previous years, this is the third lowest count in the WMC history. So last year was the second lowest count, and 2020 was the all-time lowest count we've ever recorded. I think what's most striking is that in the last 5 years, we've had three of the lowest counts in history. And so I think what this emphasizes is that we need to double down on our actions. We've seen from 2020 to 2021 that when there's a series of fortunate events, then monarchs can bounce back. And so I think what we would like to see in the future is our environments that can be conducive for bounce backs when all the other factors line up in a better way for monarchs. We can also see from the early season showed about 6,000 monarch butterflies from October 18th through November 2nd across 218 overwintering sites. This was the second year we implemented the early season monitoring period. And kind of in contrast to last year where we only saw a slight increase from the early season to mid-season, this year we saw like an 89% increase from 6,000-ish to a little over 12,000 butterflies. So maybe that could indicate there were some more late arrivals. Could also be some other factors. But at the early season time, we had thought maybe the numbers would be a little lower, and we were quite concerned. So it was a pleasant surprise that it was just slightly higher than last year. All right, next slide. The top sites for this year were Natural Bridges State Beach with 2,500 butterflies counted during the mid-season count. The second site with the second most butterflies was a private site in Monterey County. The third highest count was at Lighthouse Field State Beach, also in Santa Cruz County. Fourth was Moran Lake with 673 butterflies, also in Santa Cruz County. And then once again, we had the fifth largest site at Sky West. Sky West also had another site identified this year by our count volunteers and coordinators. So thank you to all those who volunteered and do thorough surveys because, we wouldn't have known this without you doing a thorough examination of the surrounding habitat. You guys went above and beyond. And this is especially important because this site is at risk. So Sarah, if you could click again. The Sky West overwintering sites are at risk of development right now, and a lot of community members, our volunteers, and partners across, local, state, and federal levels are working to protect this site. So if you haven't heard about this, you can Google it and learn a bit more. I think they have a petition going on and all that. But if you live in the area, you might want to get in contact with our local volunteers or regional coordinators in the Bay Area if you'd like to get involved in advocating for this site so it's not lost. When we examined the numbers across counties, we found that Santa Cruz County had the most monarchs with a total tally of 4,531. This represented about 37% of all the monarchs tallied this season. And then Alameda came in second with about 15% of the total tally. And then Monterey came in third with about 13% of the total tally. San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara came in next. But it seems like the most density was focused up in that like north central coast and Bay Area. The top cluster trees that monarchs used this season were eucalyptus, Monterey cypress, and Monterey pine trees. All right, next. So we think that there were a few things that may have influenced this year's lowish numbers, including a small spring starting size from last year. I mentioned earlier that last season was our second lowest count in history, so the butterflies leaving the overwintering sites to kickstart that spring and summer breeding season were in low numbers. So, they're starting from such a low point. It takes a lot of resources and good weather and good factors to build up to a really high number. So, so they started really small in spring. They had just overwintered, etc. We also talked with some of our research partners, including Elizabeth Crone from UC Davis and Louis Yang from UC Davis, and they reported that their breeding surveys during the monarch breeding season were some of the lower numbers that they've reported since doing these field surveys. So it seems like it was like a mediocre to poor breeding season on top of the small starting size in spring. And although it wasn't the most intense drought we've experienced in the West, there were still areas of the West that were experiencing drought this year. And that can impact nectar resources for adult butterflies, and, you know, ultimately limit some of the resources monarchs need to thrive. Next slide. I think broadening it out, this story isn't too uncommon, and monarchs are ambassador species, so I really wanted to take a moment to look at things at large and also to kind of comment on the longer term drivers of decline because, we all want to know what causes the year-to-year bounces, but I think what's more concerning and significant is the long-term decline that monarchs and other at-risk butterflies are facing. So the threats that lead or contribute to this long-term decline include pesticide exposure, ongoing pollution, climate change, introduced species, habitat loss. And this image above, like in the upper right corner, one of our science illustration interns did this year, but it shows from 2000 to 2020 butterflies experience a 20% decline in the US. And I think this figure is pretty striking. So monarchs are one of those species. And Sarah, if you could click again, we see that when we look at monarch butterflies from the 1980s to 2025, only one of 20 monarchs still remains in the migratory populations. All right, next slide. Okay, that's a little sad, but I swear we're going to get more positive in a little bit when I hand this over to Sarah. Last thing, if you want to dig deep into the data and review all the sites and all the data we collected for the early and mid-season counts, I want to direct you to our westernmonarchcount.org website and go to our data page or enter westernmonarchcount.org/data and you'll get right there. From there, you'll be able to view and download the data from this year. Next slide. And a quick shout out to some of the volunteer stats from this season. Next slide. So we had over 470 individuals participate this year. We had 1.2 thousand surveys submitted. That's like the most surveys we've ever had submitted. So congratulations, team. Folks, based on just the survey hours, so not including transportation or training time, but just the survey hours for Monarch counts, y'all put in 926 hours, which ends up being about 115.75 8-hour shifts. Wow. Thank you so much. I said this last year too, but if you don't have monetary funds to contribute to, an organization you support and value, the act of volunteering and supporting of projects is incredibly valuable as well. So maybe, for those of you who've been thinking like, how do I get involved in things? Because maybe you have limited resources. If you have time, that can be an amazing way to contribute because we truly could not do this program without our volunteers. It's just too big of a geographic range for a handful of scientists to go out and get all this done. So I am so grateful to our huge community of supporters and participants. I also wanted to give an extra shout out to a few of our volunteers who put in the most time or the most surveys. So I want to thank Susan Ramos, who is one of our East Bay regional coordinators. You put in the most survey time. Fiona Reedy, you put in the most surveys. Thank you so much to both of you. Mia Monroe, Beth Bell and John Dayton, Lasthenia Lee, Jaya Weeb, and Cynthia Brock. You all kind of mixed with both those, like most surveys and most time. So I congratulate all of you, and I'll be reaching out to you to see if I can send you a little thank you gift. Next slide. I also want to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to our regional coordinators. Just like we couldn't do the program with all of our local volunteers, Xerces could not coordinate 400 plus volunteers without your help. And you are just absolutely essential to this program. So thank you to Mia Monroe, Megan Peterman, who stepped in for her first year to help coordinate Sonoma County. Susan Ramos, Christina Garcia, Sammy Floor, Martha Nitzberg, Diana Mager, Natalie Johnston, Lisa Murphy, Jessica Griffiths, Crystal Crimson, Karis Vanderhyde, Kim Seimbik. Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced your last name right. Stu Richardson, Karen Sinclair, Sarah Cuadra-Vargas on this call. Areli Perez, who stepped in this year for San Diego, Jaya Weeb, who added on to efforts in Ventura, Rebecca Cummings for OC and for OC Habitats, and Gail Morris from Arizona. Thank you all to our regional coordinators. All right, next slide, and I think this might be where I hand it off to you, Sarah.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Isis. So yeah, really great work that you guys are doing, and we really appreciate the boots on the ground and being able to represent Xerces. We have such a small team. We're a team of 4, so having 470 volunteers is amazing. So thank you so much. But I wanted to talk to you all about some of the other good stuff that happened in 2025. I wanted to kick it off with this blue morpho radio tagging that happened in Santa Cruz. You've probably heard us present on this in the past. Our colleague Ashley Fisher has done previous pilot years, and unfortunately last year the population was too low to tag monarch butterflies in 2024, but we made it happen in 2025. And we did a tagging event in Santa Cruz in November, and it was led by this core team right here in the middle. So Elena Oy with Point Blue Conservation Science, our colleague Ashley Fisher, and Helen St. John with James Madison University. They were able to tag monarchs at 3 sites in Santa Cruz. So that was Lighthouse Field, Natural Bridges, and Moran Lake. And they absolutely rocked it. Monarchs are still being picked up as of 2 days ago. So just to let you all know, at Lighthouse Field, 9 of the 16 monarchs that were tagged are still pinging. At Natural Bridges, 4 out of the 9 are still pinging, and 8 out of the 16 at Moran Lake are still pinging. And you can open up your Project Monarch app and track these monarchs in real time. These new blue morpho tags use technology that can be picked up by cell phones, in addition to towers that were set up and retrofitted by this team. So go ahead and go into the app and see what's happening. You might see some monarchs that are starting to make their way inland, and you can see which monarchs were picked up most recently. Unfortunately, we've lost a few monarchs. We assume something happened to them. Maybe their tag fell off, or maybe they passed away. But that's normal to have some attrition as time goes on. And I also wanted to talk about PG&E and how they've been such a great player and partnering with the Xerces Society. So in fall 2025, my colleague Isis held trainings for PG&E staff in the East Bay and Marin County, and their biologists really showed an interest in stepping up and wanting to learn more about monitoring monarchs and just keeping an eye out for overwintering sites, as they do have many easements that overlap with overwintering sites in the state of California, specifically in these areas. So really great partner to have, and really setting an example for utilities that can work hand in hand with monarch conservation. So special shout out to PG&E, and thank you so much. And just talking a little bit more about SkyWest Golf Course in Hayward. I know Isis mentioned it, but to give you a little bit more context, so we have 2 sites that are in this extended area of the Hayward Executive Airport that were used to be part of a golf course that was retired in 2020, but now serves as an open space which hosts a variety of wildlife such as overwintering monarchs and western pond turtles. Um, and the site has also been enhanced with Xerces habitat kits. However, the site is threatened by development with a proposed expansion of the airport. And I wanted to shout out Mimi Dean and the Safe Open Space SkyWest grassroots group that are working with the city of Hayward to protect this vital open space. And like Isis said, you can search this up online and see how you can get involved if you're in this area. But showing you on this map, this you can see the polygons of the overwintering sites. And then on the right side are some trees that exist within that overwintering grove and monarchs that were captured as they were clustering. And these photos were taken by Christina Garcia, who is a Monarch Count coordinator up in the East Bay. So just wanted to give you a perspective that was on the ground and not just an aerial view, but monarchs are there and we're hoping that this site can be protected. And in addition to that, local advocates have also been active in Ventura, California at the Vista Del Mar site, 3139. So back in December, several mature eucalyptus trees were cut down at the site as ordered by the private landowner. WMC volunteer superstar Chris Ament and other community members stepped in to further prevent damage to the site and are now asking the city of Ventura for more protections of overwintering groves within their jurisdiction. This is another way for folks to get involved. So if you're in the area near Ventura, Chris Ament has rallied other community members to attend city council meetings to ask for more protections and the immediate protection of this overwintering site on Vista Del Mar. And talking about a few other wins that happened across the state. So for California state parks, up in this right-hand side, you see the structure. So that's a shade house that was constructed at San Clemente State Beach within the overwintering site. And the goal of building the shade house was to propagate more California native plants, such as nectar for monarchs that can be planted within the site. And interpretive staff have really amped up volunteer engagement at San Clemente State Beach. So shout out to them. They're doing really great work. And this work is also supported by the Xerces Society and WCB. Right here in the middle, this is a photo from Topanga State Park, where this overwintering site was burned in the Palisades fire, but is starting to bounce back with natives and lots of non-natives. But state parks, the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, and community members are beginning site prep. So they've removed hundreds of pounds of castor bean and other non-natives to make way for nectar and wind screenings that will be planted in February. And that's all a part of the site management plan that was developed by our partners at Althouse and Mead. So right after the Palisades fire happened, everyone's starting to get on board to try to improve this site after the fire. And then I wanted to talk about Gill Tract in Albany. So this is a very special place that serves as an example of collaboration between different members at an overwintering site. So We have the Solgarea Tay Land Trust, and the Gill Tract Community Farm, um, members of UC Berkeley, and we also have a Monarch overwintering site. But all of these players have worked together to build a space where workshops can be held, where folks can learn about Monarch overwintering, uh, where research can be done by students at UC Berkeley. So it just really shows that overwintering sites can coexist with development and with spaces that are meant for the community. So, um, yeah, shout out to all of those who've done work at Giltract. And I've included a photo. It's from 2024, but it's such a great photo. And that's Susan Ramos with other folks that were being trained for the Western Monarch Count in 2024. And then on the right side, there are some clusters that were found at Giltract this past overwintering season. So, really good stuff happening there. Okay, so how can we all take action for monarchs? We've talked about all of these good things happening in the state of California, but I know many folks want to know what else they can do. So the Xerces Society has updated the Western Monarch call to action. Um, so this might look a little different than it did in the past, but the number one action that we're asking folks to take is to restore monarch breeding and migratory habitat. So planting flowers that provide nectar for monarchs and other butterflies, planting native milkweed, and helping to increase the supply of insecticide-free native milkweed and nectar plants across the state. Number two is to protect monarchs and their habitat from pesticides. Um, so prioritizing the use of non-chemical options to prevent and manage pests whenever possible. Refraining from applying insecticides in or immediately adjacent to monarch overwintering sites when monarchs are present, and using the same level of caution to limit pesticide contamination and exposure in breeding and migratory habitats. And then third on the list is to protect and manage California overwintering sites. So become an advocate for the protection and active management, like those folks that are in Hayward and Ventura. Notify the Xerces Society of any damages or threats to overwintering habitat. Contact your elected officials at local, regional, and state levels to advocate for protection of monarch overwintering sites near you. And also learn how if you're a steward for an overwintering site, learn how to manage forested habitat to benefit monarchs and get support by joining the Xerces Overwintering Land Managers Working Group. Fourth on the list is to spread word about monarch and pollinator conservation. So I know a lot of you are doing really great work. And if you are, like, please share these messages with your coworkers, with your schools, with places of worship, social media, and encourage your friends and family to take action. There's also ways to get involved with the Xerces Society, such as becoming a Bee City USA or Bee Campus USA, installing a pollinator habitat sign to let your friends know that you're providing a safe space for pollinators, and signing the Pollinator Protection Pledge and encouraging one other person to do the same thing. And you can also volunteer with local organizations that are working to restore habitat for monarchs and pollinators. And then lastly on this list is participate in community science. There's a variety of programs that you can participate in. One is the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program, or IMMP, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And I'll get into ways that you can participate in community science with the Xerces Society. So the first is the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. Um, so this is a really easy way to get involved if you use iNaturalist Classic on your phone. Um, if you see a monarch or milkweed, wherever you are, you can take a photo, upload the observation, and then tag the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper project in iNaturalist Classic. And what this does is this tool helps us understand where monarchs are and how milkweed species are distributed. And often researchers are using this publicly available data. Um, so yeah, I encourage you to get out and take some photos of monarchs and milkweed. We also have a monarch nectar plant database. So if you observe monarch um, using different flowering plants for nectar, you can also take a photo of that and then upload to this database, which helps the Xerces Society generate plant lists for the public so that they know what to plant and when for monarchs across the state. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Xerces Habitat Kit program, which has a few different goals, but one of those goals is to address pollinator decline. So uh, habitat kits provide habitat for different taxa, not just monarchs, but bumblebees, other declining species, and overall diversity. So going back to what Isis was saying about how we've lost approximately 20% of all butterflies from the year 2000 to 2020. Planting a habitat kit will help provide more habitat, not just for monarchs, but those declining species as well. But there's also some landscape and community goals that are involved with the Habitat Kit program. So there's different kit types and regions spread all across the United States, and there's different project types. So these kits are provided to public lands, working lands, urban gardens, schools, tribes, and natural areas. And these kits support community-oriented projects and under-resourced individuals and communities. Proposals for the Habitat Kit program begin in February. So please keep a lookout on the Xerces website for that opening. And then I just wanted to mention that there are a variety of resources that you can find on xerces.org, whether it's plant lists or how to buy Be Safe plants or how to work with your garden or your working area to provide nesting and overwintering habitat for other insects and invertebrates besides monarch butterflies. You can find a plethora of resources on our website. And so I've talked a little bit about what programs you can get involved with at Xerces. I'll hand it over to Melissa Burns from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who will be speaking about broader engagement to conserve and enhance monarch breeding grounds across the West. So Melissa is the Western Monarch Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Center for Pollinator Conservation. In this role, she works with teams across the West, nationally and internationally, to support collaborative monarch and native insect pollinator conservation by bridging gaps between applied science and management. She has 20 years of experience in wildlife and habitat conservation, and she's dedicated to supporting science, managing and sharing data, leveraging resources, and developing durable partnerships to accomplish conservation goals. And we're really honored to have Melissa. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah, and also thank you to like the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation for inviting me and the agency to be here to be part of this announcement today. And so, as Sarah mentioned, I am part of our the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Center for Pollinator Conservation. The center was launched in December 2022, and it's helping our agency extend beyond traditional conservation approaches and build connections with those interested in conserving pollinators. So there's no doubt that from the overwintering numbers that were just announced today, that monarchs are in trouble. And so recognizing that fact, we believe that the numbers would have been much lower without the support and commitment of volunteers, people like you, engaged government leaders, and as well as agencies, organizations, and businesses. Your proactive efforts and your actions are helping to reduce threats, and those are key to recovering this iconic species. And so we heard a lot about the work happening on the overwintering sites and some of these other ways to get involved. And so for the next few minutes, I'm going to touch on several of the high-level efforts that are happening nationally across the West and specifically in California to help Western monarchs outside of their overwintering grounds. Okay, you can have the next slide, please. So one major highlight that I want to share is the success of the Monarch Candidate Conservation Agreement with Insurances. That's a really long name, but what this agreement does is it helps us connect with these different transportation agencies and energy companies to do good things for monarchs and other pollinators. And so as of today, there are currently 98 different energy and transportation agencies and organizations enrolled, and we're expecting that to turn over to be actually 100 in the next couple of weeks. And so as of today, these different groups have committed to creating and conserving approximately 1.3 million of acres of habitat across the United States since that agreement came into effect in 2020. So that's just 5 years of collaborative conservation, what an impact that can make. And so currently 41 states have committed to implementing some monarch habitat management practices in those right-of-ways. And that's really exciting news. Okay, next slide, please. So nationally, we've conserved more than 7.4 million acres of habitat since 2014 through our programs and partnerships. So that's a lot, but we need to stay focused and do more. And we continue to believe that more habitat is needed in more places and in more of the key focal geographies. So helping to guide and deliver that work are multiple state-led and landscape level plans that are crucial for monarch conservation. So while we know the work that's happening and locally and in small areas is really critical, these large plans are important because they help set population goals in terms of recovery numbers and habitat goals. They also can help guide the management of habitats across a wide variety of land ownerships, and they serve to coordinate efforts across multiple human-made boundaries like county lines and state lines that monarchs don't recognize, but it's important to have these plans in place so we can work collaboratively. We can have the next slide, please. So California is critical to the survival of Western monarch butterfly. You can see on this map the coastal areas that we've spent a lot of today talking about and where those overwintering sites are. But in addition to those coastal groves, the state is vital as a migratory pathway and is also essential for breeding, especially in the early spring. So increasing native milkweed and nectar plant availability across California is crucial for breeding and supporting increasing populations. So like I said, this map shows the overwintering sites, but you can also see in the lighter teal color That's the priority 1 zone, and it's important for early breeding. So when the butterflies are leaving overwintering sites, those are the first places they're going to be stopping to look for nectar and to look for places to start laying some of those eggs as they fan out across the state and north and west into other parts of the Western US. I think, and then also the darker teal is that priority 2 habitat where we think a lot more of the summer breeding zone is happening. And then remember that these areas are important for as the monarchs are going out. They're also going to return through California to head back to those overwintering sites at the end of the year. We can have the next slide, please. So this is something I'm really excited to talk to you about. In California, we have multiple efforts focused on science and innovation and collaborative conservation. One of those is the California Multi-Agency Monarch and Pollinator Collaborative. It's a bit of a mouthful, but all of those different partners are coming together to do really big things. So this group is, there's 13 different state and federal partners involved in this collaborative, and it was created to inform and promote integrated science, natural resource management, and policy that can increase the pace and the scale of monarch and pollinator conservation throughout California. I have this picture here. This document is currently under review, but it's a priority action and gap analysis report that's in its almost its final stages, and it's going to be forthcoming in March. And it's going to be available for all of us to use as a guide for prioritizing and implementing collaborative projects across the state. This California specific report, we're hoping it can also be used as a framework for other collaborative groups that are seeking to undergo similar efforts in different states or different regions. So we're hoping it acts as a blueprint or a template for conservation for others, as well as bringing us along together and finding synergies amongst work and being able to leverage capacity in terms of expertise, person power, and funding. Next slide, please. So this is one of the projects. It's a great example as well because it's a collaborative effort from 5 different entities coming together on this early season milkweed project and focusing on answering multiple questions rapidly to support and inform the creation of Western monarch butterfly early spring breeding habitat. So by partnering with others, we're identifying areas where the early season milkweed is growing naturally on the landscape, collecting seeds for future planting projects, improving our understanding of how monarchs use the naturally occurring milkweed stands. We're also using that collected plant material to amplify the amount of native plant materials and seeds available to plant other sites and restore other sites. And then we're also studying the natural sites and the planted sites to understand how the butterflies are using those sites and find the best ways to plant restoration projects that are going to rely on what we can do and also the biology of the butterfly to make it the best quality habitat possible. And so partners are planting new areas to provide more of that habitat and testing those different habitat restoration techniques. And we're doing all of that collaboratively so we can learn from each other. It's a very exciting project. Next slide. Thank you. So this is another big endeavor that Fish and Wildlife Service is leading, and that is to develop a statewide conservation benefit agreement with agricultural partners across the state. And so this is a landscape level agreement, and it will focus on creating monarch and other pollinator habitat, and then providing assurances for adjacent farming practices. This agreement has the potential to positively impact priority habitat for Western monarch, as well as other imperiled and native insect pollinators, including multiple species of bumblebees. And this is across a variety of top crop types, including almonds, strawberries, and wine grapes and beyond. So there's a lot of potential in this plan, and there are a lot of different commodity types interested in what good things they can do for these native insect pollinators. And so in the next slide, we'll narrow things down a little bit more into focal geography. So you can just see we're going down at scales to this larger level to more local levels. And so in that priority zone map we showed you a few minutes ago, you could see that priority zone 1 is a lot of that occurs in California's Central Valley. And because of that, we believe that it's important to be creating a lot of high quality habitat in a mosaic across the Central Valley. And so to key in more on that focal geography, we've developed this San Joaquin Valley Monarch Collaborative, and it is tapping into key tribal, state, federal, and private and nonprofit partners across the San Joaquin Valley, and we kicked this effort off in 2024. And so this group just released our strategic plan and our 2-year work plan this month in January. And so we're preparing for a really busy spring of planting new areas and monitoring last year's projects. And we're very excited about the future of this group and the potential that it has to deliver monarch habitat with a focus on a rapid expansion of native seed and plant material production and availability to support these efforts and to support transitioning agriculture within the Central Valley. And the intention of getting more a higher availability of native seeds and plant materials is also that when we're increasing the amount available, that we could be decreasing the cost of those plant materials as well, so that more people can be investing and creating and maintaining habitat. Okay. And this is my last slide. I love this picture. If anyone's worked with me before, I'm always kind of forcing people to do virtual or in-person high fives to create that sense of community and to celebrate our successes, because I think that's incredibly important. But we within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service look forward to continuing to coordinate, collaborate, and support the conservation of monarch butterflies and all the other native insect pollinators. And this slide just shows a fraction of the partners that come together to do this important work. I think I tallied over 200 unique partnerships last year that I had engaged with for Western Monarch. So that's just me and one person and all the folks that are interested. And so, as I said, this is just a snapshot of what's happening out there when all of us pulling together. And so I just wanted to end today by saying that if you're here today, you have a meaningful relationship with monarchs and probably other pollinators. We know that monarchs are often a gateway species for learning about and caring about these other species. And I just want to say that our connectedness is represented in our work and our dedication and our passion, and that our success depends on all of our collective efforts, and none of us can do this alone. So thank you very much, and I'll turn things back over to Sarah and Isis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you for highlighting all of the different partnerships, all of the folks that are working together for the sake of monarchs. It was a really great presentation. Thank you. Well, we're wrapping up, but we did want to acknowledge all of our dedicated volunteers and partners who collected data at overwintering sites. Again, we can never thank you enough, as well as our funders. So the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, California Wildlife Conservation Board, Elizabeth Weber, the Maxwell Hanaran Foundation, Monarch Joint Venture, Nature's Path Foods, Inc., San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, the Taggart Saxon Schubert Fund, the U.S. Forest Service International Programs, and Xerces Society members. Thank you so much. And with that, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Yay, Q&A time. We'll be joined for Q&A by Emma Pelton, our Western Monarch lead at the Xerces Society. And Emma, feel free to keep your video off, but if you are called to answer some of the questions, and oh, here she is. Everyone, welcome Emma. Okay, so looking at the questions that we have right now, it looks like several were answered. But the first one from Karen Phillips is wondering if we're able to track the home-raised monarchs and do we know how those butterflies are affecting the population? Yeah, that's the question. And so I guess what I can say is that for the Western Monarch Count, we're not necessarily looking at where the butterflies are coming from. We know generally that the butterflies overwintering in the West are coming from states and regions west of the Rocky Mountains. Um, but unless there's tagging efforts, that, there's sticker tagging, and then nowadays we have the new like solar powered backpack tagging. Unless butterflies were tagged with those and then released and show up in our overwintering sites, we don't know exactly where they originated from. But the tagging efforts with stickers has been going on for a long time, so you could look into that, and there's records of butterflies from Idaho showing up in Monterey, and this is how long they were tagged for, so at least they're that old. And so that information can give you some of the things you might be looking for. And then as we expand the newer tagging efforts, I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about that. Emma, do you want to say anything more on that? We're good to go. Okay. The question from Beth also asks if there's any indications if the early season monarchs are from a specific geographic area. So I will just say I think I answered that in the question before. Okay, so someone's asking, and they say, I'm planning a trip out this winter to see monarchs. Would I be able to volunteer while there, or do you prefer local volunteers? So, first, that's awesome that you're planning to go see monarch butterflies. Right now is more of the tail end of the season, so butterflies that were overwintering typically tend to start leaving and dispersing in late January through mid-February. So if you haven't gone yet and you're still planning to go, just be prepared to maybe not see as many butterflies. But there might still be a few hanging out. We did post a blog if Sarah or Emma wants to bring that up for a list of places that you can visit, like public monarch sanctuaries. And then also, in terms of volunteering while you're there, this winter our main surveys are all wrapped up. But if it's something you would like to do in the future, you can always contact a regional coordinator and they can pair you up with one of our local volunteers who has capacity to bring other folks out because several spots do like public counts and if they have the dates in advance, they can invite you to those and you're allowed to join in. All right. Okay, we have biologists. Let me look at this one. Okay, so from Rachel Smith, I'm an area biologist for NRCS down in SoCal and saw an abundance of the non-migratory monarchs this year. Oops, where'd you go? There we go. Is there any hope that these monarchs could offer a sort of genetic refugia for migratory monarchs, or are they just too sedentary? Second question, has there been any genetic diversity studies conducted on these migratory populations? Okay, I can answer that one and then I'm going to pass it to Emma. So, yes, several university professors and researchers are looking into the genetic relationships between migratory and what we call resident year-round breeding monarch butterflies. So, we should be learning more very soon when those studies are published. Emma, do you want to help answer the first question, which was about if the resident monarchs could offer genetic refugia for migratory monarchs?
Yeah, sure. And I'll try to find the link, but the study's being led by Chris Funk at CSU, and then there are sub-studies, so butterflies that are being tested by his lab also go on to be tested for cardenolide fingerprints, so what milkweed species they were raised on, by Mika Friedman at the University of Toronto. And the wings also go to Louis Yang at UC Davis, who's looking at isotopes, so like where broadly in the US they came from. So we're hoping in a perfect world there will be 3 amazing nested studies that talk about where that butterfly came from, what it ate when it was a caterpillar, and then also what its whole genome sequences, and may really elucidate some of these questions about residence and also just differences across North America. So we're hoping to find out more. There have been some preliminary results, but nothing official yet. So I think just staying in touch as that kind of comes out. And I don't think it's going to answer all of our questions, but I do think it's going to be a really helpful study to advance that area of knowledge.
Great. Thanks so much, Emma. Someone else asked, isn't it against CDFW regulations in California to handle monarchs at any life stage? So there shouldn't be rearing or moving of caterpillars at all, question mark. Short answer is yes, there is a regulation that prevents handling monarchs in any life stage. I think the heart of this is that rearing monarch butterflies hasn't been a proven conservation strategy for this species. And if not done in a responsible manner, it could end up hurting the wild populations a lot more. So, yes, technically in California, you are not supposed to rear, handle, uh, cage up any of the monarch butterflies. 5. Okay. Um, I think, Melissa, this might be a question for you. Michael is wondering, does Caltrans have a CCA?
Caltrans is enrolled in the Monarch CCAA that I talked about. So that national agreement, yes, we are part of that. And so different regions and Caltrans implement it differently because of different stipulations that they have in place, but we are signed on and enrolled in that, which is pretty recent and also very exciting.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Another attendee asked, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, is there a benefit to being involved helping the monarchs up here, or is it mostly California? Yes, we need everyone across North America to get involved. So please do not limit it or think that we're only calling on California people. What we're reporting are the tallies mostly found in California, but these butterflies fly hundreds to thousands of miles. They head up to Canada, they head down to Mexico, and they go all in between in the West. So, what I'd recommend is look up if there's native milkweed plants to your area. If there are and milkweed does grow naturally in your area, you could try to find some starts at a native plant nursery. You're going to want to pick pesticide-free plants, as Sarah had talked about. But like something that you can do that benefits everything, including monarchs, is incorporating native nectar species that bloom across the year. So it's really hard to find winter blooming, but they're there. So winter, spring, summer, and fall blooming nectar resources will help migratory monarchs and all the other butterflies that need your assistance too. So that's what I would recommend to you. And you can also continue to participate in community science efforts that ask you to take a photo and post to INAT. So that's another way to get involved. Another question asks, what can people do if they notice clusters of monarchs during the overwintering season, but not in a verified overwintering site? Where can we report it? This is a great question. So if you ever encounter a cluster that's not on our map, please feel free to send in a Monarch Count form. If Chris, I know you're a volunteer, so you are sending in count forms already. There is an option to select, like this is a new or unregistered site. And so then it'll ask you some follow-up questions about the location and description, and then you can still report on all those things. Once we receive that, we'll assign it a site ID, whether it's a verified site or potential site, and we'll move forward and work with you to get that locked in for future monitoring. Xerces does want to know about any sites y'all come across, so yeah. All right. Stuart Weiss, hey Stu, wants to know, how can you reconcile the nearly universal pesticide contamination of milkweed with increasing milkweeds in the Central Valley? Great question. I think
Yeah,
this is a Melissa or
I
Emma.
felt, yeah. And Emma, would you like to take this one? Okay. Okay. It is a really good question, and a question that we are asking ourselves and incorporating that question into our strategy document and our work planning. And so we know that there is a lot of different types of pesticides and a high volume of pesticides used. And then we can't really separate the fact that it is a priority area for the species historically. And so what we're working together to do is find the potential areas of the highest quality habitat and then do those plantings and marry them with monitoring and pesticide sampling when that's possible, so we can start to get a better handle on that and find if there are certain crops or certain locations where we can have that higher quality habitat. And then when we think about some of the data that's out there, we don't know a lot about like direct effects. We know a lot about how some of these ecotoxins affect European honeybees, but less about how they affect other native pollinators because that data just isn't in place. But we know from the work coming out of UC Davis, from the Williams Lab, for example, is that having access to these native plants and to these native species seems to make at least bumblebees that were studied more resistant to some of these other threats that are out there. So following that line of thinking, that having that nectar and that habitat available could actually give them the boost that they need. And again, we're taking data and trying to do this in a scientific way. So we're not just patting ourselves on the back for thinking that we're doing a good thing, but we're trying to connect all those dots. So I hope that helps too. And I'm happy to talk with anybody about any of this stuff in more detail if anyone has questions, concerns, or wants to be involved.
Thank you, Melissa. Great answer. I'm gonna do a fun one that I think's fun now. Uh, Karina's asking, is there any data from the various tracking devices yet? And so I'm wondering if Sarah or Emma might want to pull up one of those butterflies. Do we have an easy picture to share? If not, we can go to another question and I can come back to one of you.
I do have one I can share. Let me see how I can share it.
Okay, good.
Okay, let me see.
So Sarah's going to show some of the monarch butterflies that the Xerces Society and partners tagged along the California coast this year during the overwintering season, all with scientific permits, of course, and a robust methodology to limit or prevent any harm to the monarch butterflies. But I will let Sarah.
Okay.
We can
So
see
this
it.
is a little wonky, but this is one of the monarchs that was tagged at Moran Lake in Santa Cruz. that started to make its way to the Central Valley. The last detection, unfortunately, was on January 20th, but it made its way 83 miles away from its original tagged location. So we're starting to see, oh, we've seen movement ever since the monarchs were tagged, but the data has not been analyzed. We're still waiting for the season to go on, so that may take some time for to have like a robust study and statistics. But you can go onto the Project Monarch app and see exactly where these monarchs have moved to.
And there was one from Santa Barbara that was tagged by Karis, is that correct? At Elwood sites, and that one went up through San Luis Obispo.
Yes, it made a pit stop at Vandenberg Space Force Base and then went up to Pismo. I think that one has not been tracked in some time as well.
Okay. But all these are aligning with that, later season dispersal where the monarchs are exiting their overwintering sites and diapause and starting to head out in search for early milkweed and nectar to refuel. Okay, so we've got another question. Can we get a copy of this presentation that we will distribute to others? We will have the recording available. I will need to double check if we can post a slide deck as well. But if we do, we'll be posting it to westernmonarchcount.org. And then we'll also send out the materials in our constant contact email newsletter if you're signed up for our Western Monarch Count emails. So if not, visit our website, sign up for our emails, and it'll find you. Okay, that one's done too. Okay. Has there been anything learned in recent years from increased focus on monitoring spring adult monarch movement and early season reproduction in the Western region? Emma, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one that we've really asked people, and Cheryl Schultz with the Western Monarch Mystery Challenge. Many people, we've just been talking about the lack of data. There's so few butterflies in the spring and they're so spread out. So understanding how far they move, what habitat they're using, what milkweed they're using is a huge question. I do think we filled in some of the gaps, but unfortunately, because the numbers are so low, it's still like little breadcrumbs. So I think the tagging that's going on, we hope that some of the ones that were tagged this fall, like 50%, and it's dropping about 40% now, are still pinging. And then Hillary Sardinius with CDFW and Diana Magor, who's a account coordinator, just went out last week and tagged some more butterflies. So I think if you want to check that app, I'm really hoping that those tagged individuals start to reveal how far they're going and where they're going. But I do think we're learning more, but I think it continues to be part of the puzzle we know the least about.
Thank you, Emma. And I know we're at 12:16 now. Are we okay with one more question that I think a lot of folks will be interested in? Okay. Leah is asking, what is happening with the Monarch ESA listing status? What does moving ESA rulemaking from proposed rule stage to long-term action mean? And Melissa, are you okay commenting on this one?
I'm sorry, I was reading a comment from Rosita and I did not hear what you
No,
said.
no worries. Okay, so Leah is asking what is happening with the Monarch ESA listing
Oh,
status
yeah, yeah.
and what does it mean for that to move from proposed rule stage to long-term action?
Yeah, so I have a statement related to that. And so if there's more details that there's questions about, folks can either follow up with you at Xerces or with me directly. And if someone could someone drop my email into the chat so people have that handy? Because I think there was a couple other questions we won't get to, but so the Fish and Wildlife Service continues to evaluate the monarch butterfly using the best available science and in accordance with the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. As reflected in Trump's administration's unified agenda of regulatory and deregulatory actions, the final listing determination for the monarch is now included as a long-term action. And so this means that the agency does not expect to issue a final determination within 12 months of the publication of that agenda. And that agenda was published on September 22nd of 2025. And so given that, the administration remains committed to a regulatory approach that's transparent, predictable, and grounded in sound science. Any listing decision must follow the ESA's statutory requirement that determinations be based solely on the best scientific and commercially available data. So at the same time, the administration continues to emphasize the voluntary, locally driven conservation as a proven tool for supporting species and reducing the need for additional federal regulations. And so that's just talking about all the things we're doing, we talked about today, are doing all of those, the voluntary, proactive conservation and leaning in together. And so for decades, our agency has been partnering with states and tribes, private landowners, farmers, ranchers, and conservation organizations to support the monarch butterfly and its habitat. Those voluntary efforts are going to continue to be central to monarch conservation, and all of us can play an important role by the planting and maintaining the milkweed and nectar plants. So I don't know if folks have other questions or want to dive into other details or aspects of that. I could handle that, after we wrap up or in the coming days.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, since we're nearing on 12:20, I will be wrapping up the webinar now. I apologize if we didn't quite get to your question today, but please feel free to email us at monarchs@xerces.org or Western Monarch Count. Our email is wmc@xerces.org. So I'll pop those in the chat really quick. Can't multitask, so let me do this. But thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And again, we'll post the recording to our website when done.